Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss out on some seriously creepy stories. Today, we're diving into a chilling tale that'll make you think twice about working the night shift. This is the story of Ethan Carter, a young doctor who takes a job at a remote hospital with a dark secret. Grab a snack, turn down the lights, and let's get started. The highway stretched out like a grey ribbon under the late afternoon sky. Winding through endless fields of upstate New York, Ethan Carter gripped the steering wheel of his beat-up Honda, his knuckles pale, his eyes fixed on the road. At 26, he was finally a doctor, fresh out of residency, ready to save lives. His mum, a nurse who'd passed away when he was a teenager, always told him he had a gift for helping people. That's what kept him going through the sleepless nights of med school, the endless exams, the pressure. Now, he was headed to St. Augustine's Hospital, a small facility in the middle of nowhere, his first real job. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. The GPS beeped, snapping him out of his thoughts. Turn left in 500 feet, it droned. Ethan glanced at the screen, then out the window. The fields gave way to dense trees, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. A faded sign loomed ahead, St. Augustine's Hospital to 2 miles. His stomach did a little flip, not from nerves, but from excitement. This was it, his chance to make a difference. As he pulled into the hospital's parking lot, the building came into view. It was old, way older than he'd expected. The stone facade was weathered, streaked with moss, and the tall arched windows looked like eyes staring down at him. A few cars dotted the lot, and the air felt heavy like a storm was brewing. Ethan grabbed his duffel bag from the back seat, slung it over his shoulder, and headed inside. The lobby wasn't much better. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a sickly glow over cracked linoleum floors. A receptionist, an older woman with tight curls and a name tag reading Margaret, looked up from her desk. "You must be Dr. Carter," she said, her smile tight, like she was forcing it. "Welcome to St. Augustine's." "Thanks," Ethan said, offering a grin. "I'm excited to get started." Margaret's eyes flickered, just for a second, like she knew something he didn't. "You're assigned to Area C, night shift. Nurse Clara will show you around." She handed him a badge and pointed toward a hallway. Ethan followed her directions, his sneakers squeaking on the floor. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and something else, something musty, like old books. Left in a damp basement, he found Clara at the nurse's station, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes but a nonsense vibe. She wore scrubs with tiny daisies printed on them, a small rebellion against the hospital's gloom. "You're the new guy, huh?" Clara said, sizing him up. "Area C's no joke. You ready for it?" Ethan nodded, adjusting his bag. "Born ready. What's so special about Area C?" Clara hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "It's quiet. Mostly long-term patients. Just stick to your rounds, and you'll be fine." She handed him a clipboard with a schedule. "Doctor Voss will meet you later. He's been here forever, knows the place inside out." Ethan followed Clara through a maze of corridors, each one dimmer than the last. The walls were a faded yellow, peeling in places, and the air grew colder as they approached Area C when they reached the entrance. A heavy double door with a small, cloudy window. Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. The sign above read Area C, authorized personnel only. Clara swiped her badge, and the doors creaked open. Inside, the hallway was long and narrow, lit by flickering fluorescent tubes that buzzed like angry bees. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the faint hum of machinery echoed from somewhere deep in the building. Patient rooms lined both sides, their doors closed, curtains drawn. At the far end, a single red exit sign glowed like a warning. "This is your domain," Clara said, her voice lower now. "Rounds start at 8 p.m. Check vitals, update charts, keep an eye on things. Most patients sleep through the night, but some, well, they can be chatty." Ethan raised an eyebrow. Chatty. Clara didn't smile. "Just do your job, okay? And don't wander off. Stick to the main corridor." He wanted to ask more, but Clara was already walking away, her footsteps echoing. Ethan glanced down the hallway, his eyes catching on a shadow that seemed to shift at the corner of his vision. He blinked, and it was gone. Probably just the lights playing tricks, he told himself. He wasn't the type to get spooked easily. Growing up in a small apartment in Brooklyn, he'd seen plenty of creepy basements and heard his fair share of ghost stories. This was just an old building, nothing more. He spent the next hour settling in, dropping his bag in the tiny on-call room assigned to him. It had a cot, a desk, and a single bulb that flickered when he flipped the switch. He changed into his scrubs, clipped on his badge, and checked his watch. 6:30 p.m., an hour and a half until his first shift. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since breakfast. He headed to the break room Clara had pointed out, hoping for a vending machine or at least some bad coffee. The break room was small, with a wobbly table and a few plastic chairs. A window overlooked the parking lot where rain had started to fall, pattering against the glass. Ethan was rummaging through his bag for a granola bar when the door swung open. A man stepped in, tall and wiry, with grey hair and deep lines etched into his face. His white coat had Dr. Henry Voss stitched on it. "You Carter." Voss's voice was gravelly, like he'd smoked one too many cigarettes. "Yeah, Ethan Carter," Ethan said, standing to shake his hand. Voss's grip was firm, almost too tight. "First night in Area C," Voss said, not a question. His eyes studied Ethan, sharp and unblinking. "Clara tell you anything?" "Just to stick to my rounds," Ethan said, trying to keep it light. "Sounds like Area C's got a reputation." Voss didn't laugh. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and handed it to Ethan. "Read this. Follow it. Don't ask questions until you've worked a few shifts." Ethan unfolded the paper, expecting a schedule or protocol. Instead, it was a list, handwritten in jagged script. "Don't look directly at the shadows. Don't respond to whispers. If the elevator opens on its own, don't get in. Ignore any patient talking about the visitor." He looked up, ready to laugh it off as a prank, but Voss's face was dead serious. "What is this?" Ethan asked, his voice catching slightly. "Rules," Voss said. "Area C's different. You'll see." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but a crack of thunder outside made him jump. The lights flickered, just for a second, and the hum in the air seemed to grow louder. Voss turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Stick to the rules, kid, and don't be late for your shift." The door clicked shut, leaving Ethan alone with the list in his hand. He read it again, his pulse quickening. It had to be a joke, right? Hazing the new guy. But something about Voss's voice, the way the hospital felt, made his skin prickle. He shoved the paper into his pocket, telling himself he'd deal with it later. For now, he had a job to do. He grabbed his clipboard, took a deep breath, and headed toward Area C. The hallway was waiting. Ethan's sneakers squeaked against the linoleum as he walked toward Area C, the folded list of rules burning a hole in his pocket. The hospital's hum seemed louder now, a low drone that vibrated in his chest. He tried to shake off Dr. Voss' words. Area C's different. You'll see, it was just hazing, he told himself. Every new doctor probably got the same cryptic spiel. But the way Voss's eyes had bored into him, unblinking, made it hard to laugh off. He reached the heavy double doors of Area C, the authorized personnel only sign glaring down. Taking a deep breath, he swiped his badge. The lock clicked, and the doors groaned open, releasing a gust of cold air that smelled faintly of rust. The hallway stretched out before him, dim and endless, the fluorescent lights flickering like they couldn't decide whether to stay on. Ethan's clipboard felt heavy in his hand, the schedule Clara had given him listing patient rooms and vitals to check. He glanced at his watch, 7:45 p.m., 15 minutes, until his shift officially started. He figured he'd head back to the break room, maybe grab that coffee he'd been craving, and get his head straight before diving in. The list in his pocket crinkled as he turned, and he couldn't resist pulling it out again. The words, scrawled in Voss's jagged handwriting, looked even weirder under the hallway's weak light. Don't look directly at the shadows. Don't respond to whispers. What kind of place was this? Back in the break room, the rain was coming down, harder, hammering. The window like it wanted in. Ethan found a coffee machine in the corner, its buttons worn and sticky. He pressed one for black coffee, and the machine sputtered to life, filling a paper cup with something that smelled more like burnt rubber than coffee. He was about to take a sip when the door creaked open. Dr. Voss stepped in, his white coat rumpled, his face even grimmer than before. Didn't expect you back here so soon, Voss said, leaning against the wall. Thought you'd be poking around Area C already. Just getting ready, Ethan said, holding up the cup. Figured I'd need some fuel for the night. Voss didn't smile. He crossed his arms, his eyes flicking to Ethan's pocket where the list was tucked. You read it, yeah? Ethan said, trying to sound casual. What's the deal? Some kind of initiation. Scare the new guy. Voss's expression didn't change. He stepped closer, lowering his voice until it was barely louder than the rain. Not a joke, kid. Those rules are there for a reason. You follow them. You might make it through your shift. You don't. He trailed off, letting the silence fill in the rest. Ethan's grip tightened on the cup, the heat seeping into his palm. Okay, I'll bite. Why do I need rules about shadows and whispers? What's wrong with Area C? Voss sighed, like he'd had this conversation too many times. He pulled out a chair, its legs scraping against the floor, and sat down. St. Augustine's is old. Older than it looks. Area C was built back in the 60s, used for, let's just say, experiments that didn't make the history books. Things went wrong. People died. And some of them, well, they never really left. Ethan blinked, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. You're saying it's haunted. Saying it's different, Voss snapped. You'll feel it tonight. The air's heavy, the lights don't work right, and sometimes you see things, hear things. That's why the rules exist. They keep you safe. Ethan wanted to argue, too. Tell Voss he didn't believe in ghosts or hospital legends. But the memory of that shifting shadow in Area C made his throat tighten. He pulled out the list again, smoothing it on the table. All right, walk me through it. What do these mean? Voss leaned forward, pointing at the first rule. Don't look directly at the shadows. You'll see movement, shapes, out of the corner of your eye. Keep it that way. Stare too long, and they notice you. His finger moved to the next. Don't respond to whispers. You'll hear your name, maybe voices calling for help. Ignore them. Answer, and you're inviting trouble. Ethan's coffee was getting cold, but he barely noticed. And the elevator? If it opens on its own, don't get in, Voss said. It doesn't take you where you think. Last guy who tried, he didn't come back the same. His voice dropped lower for the final rule. And if a patient mentions the visitor, act like you didn't hear. They're not talking about a person, not anymore. Ethan's heart was pounding now, though he tried to hide it. This is crazy. You're telling me to ignore patients. I'm telling you to survive, Voss said, standing up. You're a doctor. You're here to do your job, not chase ghosts. Stick to the rules, and you'll be fine. He headed for the door, then paused. One more thing. If you feel like something's watching you, it probably is. Don't turn. Around the door swung shut, and Ethan was alone again. The coffee cup trembling in his hand. He set it down, untouched, and stared at the list. His rational side screamed that this was nonsense, just a tired old doctor messing with him. But the hospital's hum, the way the lights flickered, the cold that seemed to seep into his bones, it all felt wrong. He folded the list and tucked it back in his pocket, telling himself he'd play along for now, just until he got a feel for the place. He checked his watch. 7:55 p.m. time to head to Area C. The hallway was just as he'd left it, the flickering lights casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. He swiped his badge, pushed through the double doors, and stepped inside. The air was colder than before, like stepping into a freezer. The hum was louder too, vibrating through the floor. Ethan glanced at the patient chart on his clipboard. Room C104, Mrs. Larson, check vitals. Simple enough. He started down the corridor, his footsteps echoing too loudly in the silence. Halfway down, he noticed a light flickering at the far end, near the exit sign. It wasn't just a flicker, it pulsed, like a heartbeat, dimming and brightening in a rhythm that made his skin crawl. He shook his head, focusing on the chart. Old wiring, he told himself. Nothing more. But as he passed room C102, he caught a glimpse of something in his peripheral vision, a shadow, taller than it should be, moving along the wall. His breath hitched, and he remembered the first rule: don't look directly at the shadows. He kept his eyes forward, his heart racing, and hurried to room C-104. Mrs. Larson was awake, sitting up in bed, her frail hands clutching the blanket. Her eyes were wide, darting toward the door as Ethan entered. "You're the new doctor," she said, her voice shaky. "You shouldn't be here." Ethan forced a smile, checking her chart. "Just doing my rounds, ma'am. Let's get your vitals." She grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "It knows you're here," she whispered, her eyes fixed on something behind him, the visitor. "It's watching." Ethan froze, the word visitor ringing in his ears. Rule number 4. Ignore any patient talking about the visitor. He gently pulled his hand free, keeping his voice calm. "Let's focus on you, okay? I need to check your blood pressure." Mrs. Larson didn't answer, just kept staring. At the doorway, Ethan followed her gaze, half expecting to see something. The hallway was empty, but the light at the end flickered again, faster now. He turned back to Mrs. Larson, his hands moving quickly to finish the checkup. Her pulse was steady, but his wasn't. As he scribbled notes on the chart, he heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, like a breath against his ear. "Ethan, He spun around, his clipboard nearly slipping from his hands. The room was empty except for Mrs. Larson, who was still staring at the door. The whisper came again, clearer this time, calling his name from the hallway. His mouth went dry, and he gripped the clipboard tighter, remembering Voss's warning. Don't respond to whispers. He forced himself to focus, finishing the chart and stepping back into the corridor. The whisper didn't follow, but the air felt heavier, like something was waiting just out of sight. Ethan stood in the hallway of Area C, his clipboard pressed against his chest like a shield. The whisper lingered in his ears, his name echoing in the silence, but the corridor was empty. The flickering light at the far end pulsed faster, casting jagged shadows that seemed to writhe on the walls. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to steady his breathing. It was just his imagination, he told himself. Long hours, a creepy old building, and Voss's weird rules were messing with his head. He wasn't going to let some hazing prank get to him. He had a job to do. He glanced at his clipboard, forcing his focus back to the patient list. Next up was room C106, Mr. Daniels, a heart patient needing a medication check. Ethan started walking, his sneakers squeaking louder than he liked. The air in Area C felt thicker now, like wading through fog, and the hum from the building's machinery buzzed in his bones. He passed the elevator, its metal doors gleaming dully under the flickering lights. As he reached for the handle of room C106, the elevator dinged behind him. He froze, his hand hovering over the doorknob. The sound was sharp, cutting through. The hum like a knife. Slowly he turned his head, remembering Voss's rule. If the elevator opens on its own, don't get in. The doors slid open, revealing an empty car. The overhead light inside flickered, and for a split second, Ethan thought he saw something, a shadow, tall and formless, standing in the corner. He blinked, and it was gone. The doors stayed open, waiting, the silence deafening. His heart pounded, urging him to move, to do something, but he forced himself to turn back to the door. Not today, he muttered under his breath. Pushing into room C-106, Mr. Daniels was asleep, his chest rising and falling under the thin hospital blanket. Ethan checked the foredrip, adjusted the dosage as the chart instructed, and scribbled. A note. The room was quiet, almost too quiet. The only sound, the faint beep of the heart monitor. As he turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of movement in the small mirror above the sink. His reflection stared back, but behind it something shifted, dark shape, too tall, too thin. He whipped around, his pulse racing, but the room was empty. Just him and Mr. Daniels, still sleeping. Ethan rubbed his eyes, exhaustion creeping in. Get it together, he whispered to himself. Back in the hallway, the elevator doors were closed, but the light above them glowed red, like it was still active. Ethan hurried past, keeping his eyes on his clipboard. The next few rooms were uneventful patients, sleeping vitals, stable, but the whole time he felt it. A weight, like someone was watching him, just out of sight. He kept his gaze forward, avoiding the shadows that seemed to stretch longer with every step. Voss's rules echoed in his mind, but he pushed them away. He was a doctor, not some ghost hunter. He just had to make it through the shift. Around 1 a.m., halfway through his rounds, Ethan heard it again, a whisper, soft and insistent, coming. From the end of the hallway, Ethan, his name clear as day, slithered through the air. He stopped dead, his pen hovering over the chart. The rule flashed in his head. Don't respond to whispers. But it was so real, so close, like someone was standing right behind him. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to keep moving, but the whisper followed, growing louder, more desperate. "Ethan, please." He spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the dim corridor. Nothing, just the flickering lights and the red exit sign glowing like a distant ember. His hands were shaking now, the clipboard rattling against his thigh. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but his voice sounded small, swallowed by the hallway's oppressive silence. He turned back, determined to finish his rounds, when a door to his left room C112 creaked open an inch. He hadn't touched it. No one had. Ethan stared at the door, his flashlight beam trembling. The chart didn't list anyone in C112 tonight. He stepped closer, his breath shallow, and pushed the door open with his foot. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight. The bed was empty, the sheets neatly tucked, but the air felt wrong, heavy with a chill that made his teeth ache. He swept, the flashlight around, revealing nothing but medical equipment and a dusty chair. Then, in the corner, he saw a shadow, darker than the rest, standing upright like a person. Its edges were blurry, its face a smudge, but it was there, watching him. His heart slammed against his ribs, and he stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from his hand. It hit the floor with a clatter, the beam spinning wildly across the walls. The shadow didn't move, but Ethan felt its gaze, heavy and cold, pinning him in place. "Don't look directly at the shadows." He squeezed his eyes shut, backing out of the room, and slammed the door shut. His chest heaved as he leaned against the wall, the whisper still echoing in his mind. He didn't dare look back. The rest of the shift was a blur. Ethan moved from room to room, checking vitals, updating charts, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of the lights, made him jump. He kept his eyes down, avoiding the corners where shadows seemed to pool like spilled ink. By 3 a.m., he was back at the nurse's station, scribbling his last notes. Clara was there, sipping coffee, her face unreadable. "Rough first night?" she asked, not looking up from her paperwork. Ethan hesitated, the words caught in his throat. "It's quiet," he said finally, echoing her earlier words. "Too quiet." Clara's pen paused, and she glanced at him, her eyes sharp. "You saw something, didn't you?" He opened his mouth to deny it, but the memory of the shadow in C112, the whisper calling his name, stopped him. "Just tired," he lied, forcing a smile. "Old buildings, you know." Clara didn't buy it. She set her pen down and leaned closer. "Listen, Ethan, Area C's been like this for years. Long before me, before Voss. You stick to the rules, and you'll be okay. But if you're already hearing things..." She trailed off, her gaze flicking to the hallway. "Be careful." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. He wanted to ask about the visitor, about the shadow, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he grabbed his clipboard and headed for the on-call room. His shift was over, but sleep felt impossible. The hospital's hum followed him, a constant reminder of the night's strangeness. He collapsed onto the cot, the springs creaking under his weight, and pulled the list from his pocket. The rules stared back at him, each one now a warning he couldn't ignore. As he lay there, staring at the flickering bulb above, exhaustion pulled at him. His eyes grew heavy, and the hum faded into the background. He drifted off, hoping for a dreamless sleep, but the darkness had other plans. In his mind, he was back in Area C, standing at the end of the hallway. A figure stood under the exit sign, wearing a tattered hospital gown, its face blurred like a smudged photograph. It reached out, its voice a whisper that cut through him like ice. "Ethan, you shouldn't be here." He jolted awake, his heart racing, the cot creaking beneath him. The on-call room was dark, the bulb finally burned out. His phone read 6 a.m., his shift was long over. But the whisper lingered, and the air felt colder than it should. He grabbed his bag, desperate to get out of the hospital, but as he stepped into the hallway, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching, waiting for him to break the rules again. Ethan stumbled out of the on-call room, his bag slung over his shoulder, the echo of the dream still clawing at his mind. That figure in the tattered hospital gown, its blurred face, the whisper "Ethan, you shouldn't be here" felt more real than the flickering hallway he now stood in. The air in Area C was colder than before, the hum of the hospital louder, like it was alive and breathing. His phone's screen glowed 6:05 a.m. The grey light of dawn creeping through a distant window, but it did nothing to ease the weight pressing on his chest. He needed answers, or at least a moment to clear his head. He hurried through the double doors, the authorized personnel only sign seeming to mock him as he passed. The main hospital felt less oppressive, but the memory of the shadow in room C112 and Mrs. Larson's warning at nose, "You're here," followed him like a shadow of its own. He found the nurse's station, where Clara was still there, her shift apparently endless. She was flipping through charts, her coffee cup now empty, the daisy-patterned scrubs looking out of place in the hospital's gloom. "You look like you saw a ghost," Clara said, glancing up. Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, searching his face. Ethan dropped into a chair across from her, running a hand through his hair. "Rough night," he said, his voice hoarse. He wanted to tell her everything, the whisper, the shadow, the way the elevator seemed to taunt him, but Voss's rules and Clara's earlier warning made him hesitate. Area C's, intense. Clara set her pen down, leaning forward. "It gets to everyone the first time." "What happened?" He took a deep breath, deciding to test the waters. "I heard something, my name, whispered out in the hallway. And I saw, I don't know, a shadow, maybe, in an empty room." He paused, watching her reaction. "And one of the patients, Mrs. Larson, said something about the visitor." Clara's face tightened, her fingers tapping the desk. "You ignored her, right? Like the rules say." Ethan nodded, though his stomach twisted. "Yeah, but it's hard to brush off." She was so scared, and then he hesitated, the dream flashing in his mind. "I had this dream. A figure in a hospital gown, standing in Area C, saying I shouldn't be here." It felt real. Clara didn't answer right away. She glanced at the hallway, as if expecting something to appear, then leaned closer, her voice low. "You're not the first to dream about Area C. This place has stories, Ethan, old ones. Most of us don't talk about them, but they don't go away." "What kind of stories?" Ethan asked, his curiosity outweighing his fear. Clara sighed, like she was breaking some unspoken rule. Back in the 70s, Area C was different. They used it for experiments, not the kind you read about in medical journals. Patients went in, not all came out. There was one, a young woman, who died under strange circumstances. People say she's still here, tied to Area C. They call her the visitor. Ethan's mouth went dry. The figure in his dream, the tattered gown, the blurred face, it matched too closely. "That's just a ghost story, right?" Something to scare newbies. Clara's eyes didn't waver. Maybe, but I've worked here 20 years. I've heard things, seen things. So has Voss. Why do you think he gave you those rules? Ethan leaned back, his mind racing. He wanted to laugh it off, to cling to the logic that had gotten him through med school, but the dream, the whisper, the shadow, they were chipping away at his skepticism. If this is real, why does anyone stay? Why work here? Clara shrugged, picking up her pen again. Some of us don't have a choice. Others, we feel like we owe it to the patients. But you're new. You can still walk away. Words hung in the air, heavy as the hospital's hum. Ethan didn't know what to say. He'd worked too hard to get here, to become a doctor like his mum wanted. Quitting wasn't an option. Not yet. But the dream lingered, and he needed to know more. Any way I can check the history, he asked. Like old records or something. Clara hesitated, then nodded. There's an archive room in the basement. Old patient files, logs, that kind of thing. But it's not exactly organized, and you'll need permission from admin. Be careful what you dig up, Ethan. Some things are better left alone. He nodded, thanking her, and headed out, his mind buzzing. The archive room sounded like a long shot, but it was something. He spent the morning in the hospital's cafeteria, forcing down a stale bagel and trying to shake the dream's grip on him. By noon, he'd gotten approval from Margaret at reception to access the archives, though her tight smile told him she wasn't thrilled about it. The basement was a labyrinth of concrete walls and flickering bulbs, the air damp and heavy with the smell of mold. Ethan found the archive room behind a rusted metal door, its shelves packed with dusty boxes and yellowed files. He started flipping through patient records from the 1970s, his fingers smudging with grime. Most were routine admissions, discharges, standard procedures, but after an hour he found it, a file labeled Ward, Emily, Area C, 1973. His hands shook as he opened it. Emily Ward, 22 years old, admitted for chronic pain, enrolled in an experimental drug trial. The notes were clinical at first dosages, Vitelsbut. Then they turned strange. Patient reports seeing shadows in room, complains of voices at night. The final entry, dated October 15th, 1973, was blunt. Patient deceased. Cause undetermined. Scribbled in the margin, in faded ink, was a single word. Visitor. Ethan's stomach churned. The dream, Mrs. Larson's warning, Clara's story, it all pointed to Emily. He snapped a photo of the file with his phone, his hands trembling so badly he nearly dropped it. The basement felt colder now, the hum louder, like the hospital was watching him. He shoved the file back, grabbed his bag, and hurried upstairs. The photo burning a hole in his pocket. Back in the daylight of the main hospital, Ethan felt a little steadier, but not much. He couldn't shake the image of Emily's blurred face from his dream, or the way the shadow in C-112 had seemed to see him. He needed to talk to Clara again, maybe Voss. But his next shift was looming another night in Area C. The thought made his skin crawl, but he couldn't back out now. He had to know what was happening, why Emily's name was tied to this place. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky a bruised purple, Ethan changed into his scrubs and headed to the break room. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy, the hospital's hum a constant drone. He sat at the wobbly table, staring at the photo of Emily's file on his phone. The word visitor glared back at him, a challenge and a warning. He didn't notice the door creak open until Voss's gravelly voice cut through the silence. "You're back," Voss said, standing in the doorway, his eyes narrowing. "Thought you might have run for the hills after last night." Ethan looked up, his throat tight. "I'm not a quitter," he said, but his voice wavered. "But I need to know what's going on in Area C. I found something about a patient, Emily Ward." Voss's face darkened, and he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You've been digging," he said, not a question. "I told you to follow the rules, not play detective." "I need answers," Ethan said, standing to meet Voss's gaze. "If this place is haunted, or whatever, I can't just ignore it." Voss sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're stubborn, kid. That's dangerous here." He paused, glancing at the window where the night pressed against the glass. "All right, but you're not gonna like what you find. And once you know, there's no going back." Ethan's heart pounded, but he nodded, gripping his phone with Emily's file still open. The hum of the hospital seemed to grow louder, and outside, the darkness deepened, swallowing the last of the daylight. The break room felt smaller now, the air thick with tension as Ethan stared at Dr. Voss. The older doctor's warning, "Once you know, there's no going back," hung between them like a storm cloud. Outside, the night pressed against the window. The hospital's hum, a low growl that seemed to vibrate in Ethan's chest. He clutched his phone, the photo of Emily Ward's file glowing on the screen, the word visitor staring back at him. He wanted to push Voss for answers, but the older man's face was unreadable, his eyes shadowed in the dim light. "I'm not here to play games," Ethan said, his voice steadier than he felt. "If Area C's dangerous, I need to know why. Who was Emily Ward? What happened to her?" Voss leaned against the door, his arms crossed. "You're not ready for that story, kid. Not yet. But if you're set on digging, keep your eyes open. Tonight, Area C's got a way of showing you things, whether you want to see them or not." He turned to leave, then paused. "And don't break the rules again. You're already on thin ice." The door clicked shut, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. He shoved his phone into his pocket, his heart racing. Voss's cryptic warnings were starting to feel less like hazing and more like a lifeline. He grabbed his clipboard, checked his watch, 7:50 p.m., headed for Area C. The hallway was waiting, and he wasn't sure he was ready for what it might show him. The double doors creaked as he swiped his badge. The cold air of Area C hitting him like a slap. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting jagged shadows that seemed to move when he wasn't looking. He gripped his clipboard tighter, the list of rules tucked in his pocket, feeling heavier with every step. His first stop was room C104, Mrs. Larson again. As he approached, the whispers started, faint at first, like a breeze rustling leaves. "Ethan," he froze, his breath catching. The rule echoed in his mind, "Don't respond to whispers." But the voice was clearer now, almost pleading, coming from the end of the hallway where the exit sign glowed red. He kept his eyes on the door to C104, forcing himself to move. Mrs. Larson was awake, her frail hands twisting the blanket, her eyes darting to the shadows behind him. "You're back," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's closer now. It knows you're looking." Ethan's skin prickled, but he forced a calm smile. "Just here to check your vitals, ma'am." He moved quickly, checking her pulse, but her words gnawed at him. "It knows you're looking." He remembered the shadow in C112, the way it had watched him. As he scribbled notes, the whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices now, overlapping, calling his name. He didn't look back, but the air felt heavier, like something was standing right behind him. Leaving the room, he hurried down the hallway, his flashlight beam cutting through the dimness. The shadows seemed to shift, stretching toward him like fingers. He passed the elevator, its doors closed but humming like it was waiting. Then, a new sound, a faint creak, like a door opening. He spun around, his beam landing on a door he hadn't noticed before, tucked between C108 and C109. It was unmarked, its paint chipped, a rusty padlock hanging loose. His chart didn't list it, and Clara hadn't mentioned it. Curiosity battled. With fear and curiosity won. Ethan approached, his heart pounding. The padlock was cold under his fingers, and it fell away with a soft clank, like it had been waiting for him. He pushed the door open, revealing a small, cluttered room. Dust hung in the air, catching in his flashlight beam. Old medical equipment, syringes, cracked monitors lined the walls, and a wooden desk sat in the corner, covered in papers. The air was stale, thick with the smell of decay. Ethan stepped inside, his sneakers stirring up clouds of dust. On the desk, he found a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. He opened it, his hands trembling. The handwriting was neat, dated 1972, signed by a nurse named Margaret Ellis. The entries started innocently patient updates, shift notes, but grew darker. Trial patients in Area C showing unusual symptoms. Shadows reported in rooms. Dr. Hargrove insists we continue. Ethan's breath hitched. Another entry, dated a year later. Emily Ward, deteriorating. She screams about a visitor at night. Hargrove says it's delirium, but I've heard it too. The final page was frantic, ink smudged. Emily's gone. They're covering it up. I can't stay silent, but I'm scared. Ethan's stomach twisted. This was the truth about Emily Ward. The hospital had been hiding something tied to her death, to the whispers and shadows. He snapped photos of the journal with his phone, his hand shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. The hum in the room grew louder, vibrating through the floor, and the shadows seemed to pulse, closing in. He broke the first rule, staring directly at them, and for a moment, he swore he saw a figure tall, blurred, standing in the corner. He stumbled back, his flashlight flickering. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He grabbed the handle, yanking it open, and ran into the hallway, his chest heaving. The whispers were everywhere now, a cacophony of voices chanting his name, urging him to leave, leave, leave. He clutched the clipboard, his lifeline to sanity, and hurried to the next room, trying to focus on his job. But the journal's words burned in his mind, and the shadows followed him, darker, closer. By 2 a.m., the patients were restless. In room C110, a man named Mr. Cartoneau, relation, grabbed Ethan's arm as he checked his four. It's here, he rasped, his eyes wide, with terror. The visitor, it walks the halls at night. Don't let it see you. Ethan pulled away, muttering reassurances, but his voice shook. The rule about ignoring the visitor felt impossible now. Every patient seemed to sense it, their eyes, tracking something Ethan couldn't see. The elevator dinged again, its doors sliding open as he passed. He didn't look, didn't stop, but the air grew colder, the hum louder. He reached the nurse's station, his hands trembling as he scribbled. Notes, Clara wasn't there, and the silence was suffocating. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the photos of the journal. the words blurring as his eyes burned with exhaustion. He wanted to call Voss, to demand answers, but the thought of facing Area C again made his stomach lurch. He sank into a chair, the journals weighed heavy in his mind. Emily Ward, the experiments, the cover pit was all real. And whatever the visitor was, it wasn't just a story. He broke another rule, staring at the shadows pooling under the station's desk. They seemed to shift, forming a shape of figure in a tattered gown, its face a smudge. He blinked, and it was gone, but his heart wouldn't slow down. He needed to know more, but every step deeper into Area C felt like a step toward something. He couldn't escape. As the clock ticked toward 3 a.m., Ethan heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. He gripped his flashlight, his pulse racing, and stepped out of the station. The corridor was empty, but the exit sign at the end flickered, and the whispers returned, louder, more insistent. "Ethan, leave." He tightened his grip, his flashlight beam shaking as he moved toward the next room. He wasn't sure if he was chasing answers or running from them, but one thing was clear. Area C wasn't letting him go. Ethan's flashlight beam trembled as he moved through the hallway of Area C, the whispers chasing him like a swarm of insects. "Ethan, leave." The words slithered through the air, louder now, weaving through the hospital's relentless hum. His sneakers squeaked against the linoleum, each step heavier than the last. The shadows on the walls seemed to pulse, stretching toward him, but he kept his eyes forward, clinging to the rule. Don't look directly at the shadows. His clipboard was slick with sweat, the patient list blurring under his shaky gaze. He had to keep going, had to finish his rounds. But the journal he'd found in the hidden room weighed on him. Its words, "Millie's gone." They're covering it up, burning in his mind. He reached room C-110, Mr. Carter's room, his heart still racing from the footsteps he'd heard. The old man was awake, his eyes wide and glassy, staring at the ceiling. "It's here, Mr. Carter whispered as Ethan checked his IV, the visitor. "It's watching you, too." Ethan's hand froze on the drip, the rule flashing in his mind. Ignore any patient talking about the visitor. But Mr. Carter's voice was desperate, his frail fingers clutching the bedrail. "Please," he rasped. "Don't let it take me. I'm right here," Ethan said, forcing his voice to stay calm. "You're okay, Mr. Carter. Just rest." He adjusted the 4, scribbling a note, but his hands shook so badly the pen slipped, leaving a jagged line across the chart. The whispers surged, a chorus now, chanting, "Leave, leave, leave." Ethan glanced at the doorway, half expecting to see the figure from his dream, but it was empty. Just the flickering lights and the red exit sign, pulsing like a heartbeat. He stepped back into the hallway, his flashlight cutting through the dimness. The air was colder, heavier, like it was pressing him down. He moved to the next room, but the whispers followed, louder, closer, brushing against his ear like a breath. "Ethan, you can't stay." He clenched his jaw, ignoring them, but his resolve was crumbling. The journal, the shadows, the patient's fear, it was too much. He wasn't sure what was real anymore. Then a sharp beep cut through the noise. The heart monitor in room C-106, Mr. Daniels. Ethan sprinted down the hall, his flashlight bouncing, the whispers fading behind the alarm's wail. He burst into the room, finding Mr. Daniels thrashing in his bed, his face pale, eyes wide with panic. The monitor screamed, its lines jagged, showing a failing heart. Ethan's training kicked in. He grabbed the crash cart from the corner. his hands moving on autopilot defibrillator pads. Check vitals. Call for help. Code blue, room C-106. He shouted into his radio, but static was the only response. He pressed the pads to Mr. Daniels' chest, charging the defibrillator. Clear. The shock jolted the man's body, but the monitor didn't change. Ethan tried again, his voice cracking. Come on, stay with me. Another shock, another fact line. The whispers returned, louder than ever, right in his ear. You can't save them. He froze, the paddles trembling in his hands. The voice wasn't coming from the hallway, was inside the room. Inside his head, Mr. Daniels' eyes locked onto his, unseeing, and for a split second, Ethan saw something else. In them a shadow, a blurred face, staring back. He stumbled back, the paddles clattering to the floor. The monitor flatlined, a long, unbroken beep filling the room. Mr. Daniels was gone. Ethan's knees buckled and he sank to the floor, his breath coming in gasps. He'd followed protocol, done everything right, but it wasn't enough. The whispers swirled around him, mocking, relentless. You can't save them. He pressed his hands to his ears, trying to block them out, but they were everywhere. The room felt smaller, the shadows closing in, and he swore he saw the figure from his dream. Gown, blurred face, standing in the corner. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his clipboard, and ran from the room. The hallway was a blur, the lights flickering faster, the hum deafening. He reached the nurse's station, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the radio. Clara, anyone, I need help. He called, but the static roared back, louder than before. He sank into a chair, his mind reeling. Mr. Daniels was dead, and he'd heard that voice, seen that figure. Was it his fault? Had he missed something? Clara appeared minutes later, her face pale as she rushed to C-106. Ethan followed, his legs heavy, dreading what she'd say. She checked the monitor, the chart, her expression grim. You called the code? She asked, her voice tight. Yeah, Ethan said, his throat dry. I did everything by the book. I don't know what happened. Clara's eyes softened, but only for a moment. It happens sometimes. Old patients, weak hearts, but admin's gonna want a report. They might pin this on you, Ethan. Procedural error, even if you did everything right. Ethan's stomach dropped. Pin it on me. I followed protocol. I know, Clara said, placing a hand on his shoulder. But this place, it doesn't play fair. Area C, especially. She glanced at the hallway, her voice dropping. You heard something, didn't you, during the code? He nodded, unable to lie. A voice. It said I couldn't save him, and I saw something in the room. Clara's face hardened. That's why we have the rules. You're breaking them, Ethan. Looking at shadows, listening to whispers. You're drawing it. To you, it? Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. The visitor, Clara said, her eyes flicking to the corridor. Whatever it is, it's tied to Area C, to Emily Ward, and now it's got its eyes on you. Ethan's heart pounded, the journal's words flashing in his mind, they're covering it up. He wanted to tell Clara about it, about the experiments, but the weight of Mr. Daniels' death crushed him. He'd failed a patient, and now the hospital's secrets were closing in. He stumbled back to the on-call room, collapsing onto the cot. Sleep was impossible, but exhaustion pulled him under, and the dream came again. He was in Area C, the hallway endless, the exit sign a distant speck. The figure in the tattered gown stood before him, closer now, its blurred face almost forming. "Features, help me," it whispered, its voice a mix of pain and anger. "They left me." Ethan reached out, desperate to see its face, but the shadows swallowed him, and he woke with a gasp, his shirt soaked with sweat. The on-call room was dark, the bulb flickering weakly. His phone read 5 a.m. He couldn't stay here, couldn't face another shift without answers. Clara's words echoed, jaw-drawing it to you, but he wasn't sure he could stop. The journal, Emily's file, the whispers, they were pieces of a puzzle he had to solve. Even if it broke him, he grabbed his bag and headed to the break room, hoping to find Voss. The older doctor was there, sipping coffee, his face etched with exhaustion. Ethan didn't wait for pleasantries. "I found a journal," he said, his voice raw, "about Emily Ward. Experiments, a cover-up, and tonight a patient died. I heard a voice, saw something. You need to tell me what's going on." Voss set his cup down, his eyes narrowing. "You're in deep now, kid." "Too deep." He leaned forward, his voice low. "Area C's got a history, and it doesn't let go. Others have tried to dig, like you. Most of them left broken, or worse. You still got a chance to walk away." "I'm not leaving," Ethan said, his voice shaking with defiance. "Not until I know the truth." Voss sighed, rubbing his face. "Then you better be ready for what comes next. Area C's not done with you." He stood, glancing at the hallway. "Go home, get some rest. But don't think you can outrun it. It's already got its hooks in you." Ethan watched Voss leave, the weight of his words settling like a stone in his chest. He pulled out his phone, the photos of the journal glowing in the dark. He needed more than files, more than stories. He needed proof, something to make sense of the nightmare Area C was becoming. Ethan sat in the break room, the glow of his phone casting shadows across his face. The photos of the journal, Margaret Ellis's frantic words about Emily Ward, and the experiments burned into his mind. Voss's warning echoed, "It's already got its hooks in you." He wanted to believe it was just exhaustion, that the whispers, the shadows, the dream were all in his head. But Mr. Daniel's death, the voice saying you can't save them, felt like a weight crushing his chest. He couldn't walk away now, not when he was so close to the truth. He needed proof, something solid to explain the nightmare that Area C had become. He scrolled through the journal photos, pausing on the name Margaret Ellis. The nurse who'd written those entries might still be alive. Clara had mentioned the archives, but she'd also said something about retired staff. Ethan opened his laptop, the break room's weak Wi-Fi stuttering as he searched for Margaret Ellis in upstate New York. After a few dead ends, he found a phone number linked to a Margaret Ellis in a nearby town, retired from St. Augustine's. In the 80s, his hands shook as he dialed, the hum of the hospital pulsing in the background like a heartbeat. The voice on the other end was frail but sharp, like she was used to being on guard. "Hi, Ms. Ellis. My name's Ethan Carter. I'm a doctor at St. Augustine's Hospital. I found a journal with your name in the archives, about Area C, about Emily Ward. I need to know what happened." Silence stretched on, so long Ethan thought she'd hung up. Then, a shaky breath. "You shouldn't be digging into that," Margaret said. "That place, it's cursed. Emily was part of a drug trial, something the hospital wasn't supposed to be doing. Dr. Hargrove, he ran, it pushed experimental meds on patients, said it was for pain relief, but it wasn't. Emily suffered, saw things, heard things. She died screaming about a visitor. They covered it up, said it was natural causes. I quit after that, but I still hear her sometimes. Ethan's throat tightened. Hear her? You mean, like now? Not now, Margaret said. In dreams? In quiet moments? If you're asking about her, you've seen her too, haven't you? He swallowed hard, the image of the tattered gown and blurred face flashing in his mind. Yeah, I think so. What does she want? Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. Justice. She's trapped there. In Area C, she won't rest until someone exposes what they did. But be careful, Dr. Carter. The more you know, the more she'll pull you in. The call ended, and Ethan sat frozen, the hospital's hum louder than ever. Justice. That's what Emily wanted. But how could he expose a decades-old cover-up? He needed more than a journal and a phone call. He needed evidence, something admin couldn't bury. His shift was starting soon, another night in Area C, and the thought made his stomach churn. But he had to go back. He had to face her. He changed into his scrubs, the list of rules still in his pocket, now crumpled and worn. The hallway to Area C felt longer tonight, the double doors heavier as he swiped his badge. The air inside was icy, the flickering lights casting shadows that seemed to follow him. The whispers started almost immediately, not just his name now, but words. Help me. They left me. He gripped his clipboard, his flashlight beam shaking as he moved toward room C104. Mrs. Larson was asleep, her breathing shallow, but her chart had a new note, scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting. Visitor observed at 2 a.m. Ethan's blood ran cold. Someone else had seen it. He moved through his rounds, checking vitals, his hands moving on autopilot. The whispers grew louder, the shadows darker, pooling in corners like liquid. He broke the rule again, glancing at them, and they seemed to shift, forming the outline of a figure in a tattered gown. His heart raced, but he kept moving, determined to finish his shift. Then, near the end of the hallway, he saw the unmarked door from last night, the one with the journal. It was ajar, the padlock gone. Ethan hesitated, his flashlight beam trembling. He shouldn't go in, not after last time, but Margaret's words, she won't, pushed him forward. He stepped inside, the air thick with dust and decay. The journal was still on the desk, but something else caught his eye. A metal box, half hidden under papers, its lid rusted but open. Inside were vials, their labels faded but legible. Trial Compound X73, St. Augustine's, 1972. Next to them, a photo grainy, black and white, showing a young woman in a hospital bed, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. The name on the chart. Beside her read Emily Ward. Ethan's hands shook as he snapped a photo of the box and the picture. This was it, proof of the experiments. But before he could move, the door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. The whispers surged. A deafening chorus. Help me. Expose them. The shadows in the room thickened, forming a figure in the corner tall, in a tattered gown. Its face a blur, but clearer now, eyes burning with pain. It moved toward him, and Ethan stumbled back, his flashlight flickering. Emily, he whispered, breaking another rule. The figure stopped, its head tilting, and for a moment he saw her pale skin, dark hair, eyes filled with anguish. Then the room spun, and visions flooded his mind. Emily strapped to a bed, needles in her arms, screaming as shadows loomed over her. Doctors in white coats, scribbling notes, ignoring her pleas. A final, desperate cry as her heart stopped. The pain was unbearable, like it was his own, and he fell to his knees, gasping. The figure reached out, its hand inches from his face, and the whispers became a scream. "Tell them." Ethan's vision blurred, his body shaking, and he crawled toward the door, yanking it open. He stumbled into the hallway, the visions fading but leaving a searing ache in his chest. The figure was gone, but the air was heavy, the hum deafening. He leaned against the wall, his flashlight clattering to the floor, his body trembling from the encounter. He didn't know how long he stood there, but the hospital's clock read 3 a.m. when he finally moved. His phone buzzed, the photos of the vials and Emily's picture still there, proof of what he'd seen. He had to get them out, had to show someone, but his body felt like it was falling apart. The weight of Emily's pain, her anger, was too much. He staggered to the nurse's station, collapsing into a chair. His breath ragged. Clara found him there, her eyes wide with concern. "Ethan, what happened? You look like death." He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "I saw her," he managed, "Emily. In that room, she showed me everything. The experiments, her death. She wants me to tell people." Clara's face paled, but she didn't look surprised. "You need to stop," she said, her voice firm. "You're in too deep. Area C's breaking you, just like it broke others." "I can't stop," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "I have proof, photos, the journal. I have to do this for her." Clara grabbed his arm, her grip tight. "You think you're the first to try. People have died digging into this, Ethan. Walk away while you still can." He pulled free, standing on shaky legs. "I'm not leaving her," he said, the words surprising him with their strength. "Not until this is over." Clara's eyes softened, but she didn't argue. "Then be careful," she said, "because Area C doesn't let go." She turned back to her charts, leaving Ethan alone with his phone and the weight of what he'd seen. He stumbled toward the on-call room, his body screaming for rest, but his mind was racing. He had to find a way to expose the truth, to give Emily the justice she demanded, even if it cost him everything. Ethan collapsed onto the cot in the on-call room, his body trembling. His mind a storm of images of Millie's blurred face, the rusted vials, her screams from the vision. The journal photos on his phone glowed in the dark, proof of the hospitals. Scenes, but they felt like a weight he couldn't carry. The hum of St. Augustine's pulsed through the walls, louder than ever, like it was mocking him. He wanted to run, to leave Area C and never look back. But Emily's voice told them, code in his head, binding him to her pain. He clutched the crumpled list of rules, its edges worn from his constant handling, and tried to breathe. Sleep was out of the question, but his body was shutting down, his eyes burning with exhaustion. The next morning, Ethan barely made it through his shift report. Clara watched him, her eyes heavy with worry, but he couldn't meet her gaze. Mr. Daniels' death hung over him, the hospital's admin already whispering about a review, maybe a suspension. He didn't care about his job anymore. He cared about Emily, about the truth. But the visions, the whispers, the shadows, they were breaking him. He needed help, not just for the hospital's secrets, but for himself. He drove to a small clinic in town, his hands shaking on the wheel. The therapist, Dr. Rachel Harper, was kind but direct. Her office a stark contrast to the hospital's gloom with its warm lighting and soft chairs. Ethan poured out everything, the rules, the whispers. The shadow in C-112, Emily's file, the journal, the vision. He showed her the photos, his voice cracking as he described the figure in the tattered gown. Dr. Harper listened, her face calm but her pen moving quickly across her notepad. "It sounds like you've been through a lot of stress," she said. When he finished, "Trauma, maybe PTSD. Old hospitals can feel oppressive, and with the long hours, the patient death, it's no wonder your mind's playing tricks." "It's not tricks," Ethan said, his voice sharp. "I saw her, Emily Ward. She showed me what they did to her." Dr. Harper leaned forward, her tone gentle. "Grief and guilt can manifest in powerful ways, Ethan. You lost a patient, and you're carrying that weight. Combined with the hospital's history, it's natural to see connections, even ones that aren't there." Ethan wanted to argue, to shove the photos in her face, but her words hit hard. Was it all in his head? The whispers, the shadows, could they be stress, like she said? But the journal, the vials, Margaret Ellis's voice, they were real. He left the session with a prescription for anti-anxiety meds and a recommendation to take leave. But his resolve didn't waver. Emily deserved justice, even if it cost him his sanity. Back at his apartment, a cramped studio in town, Ethan couldn't escape Area C. Every shadow in the corner of his eye felt like her. Every creak of the floorboards, a whisper. He tried the meds, but they only dulled the edges, not the fear. His dreams were worse, now Emily, clearer each night, her face almost visible, her voice pleading, "Tell them." He woke up gasping, his heart racing. The list of rules still in his pocket, like a curse he couldn't shake. After a week, he couldn't take it anymore. He typed up a resignation letter, his fingers trembling on the keyboard. Effective immediately. "I am resigning from my position at St. Augustine's Hospital." He didn't explain. Weidman wouldn't care, and Voss and Clara already knew. He emailed it to Margaret at reception, then sat back, staring at the photos on his phone. The journal, the vials, Emily's picture, they were his last connection to her. But he couldn't just walk away. Margaret Ellis's words rang in his ears. She won't rest until someone exposes what they did. Ethan opened his laptop, his hands steadier now, and started typing an email to a local journalist he'd found online. Someone known for digging into old scandals. He attached the photos, the journal, the vials. Emily's fileland wrote a summary of what he'd found. The experiments, the cover-up, the death in 1973. He hesitated, his cursor hovering over the send button. This could ruin the hospital, maybe even his career. But Emily's face, her pain, pushed him forward. He clicked send, his heart pounding. That night, he dreamed of Area C again. The hallway stretched endlessly, the exit sign a faint glow. Emily stood before him, her face clearer, now pale, with dark, hollow eyes. She didn't speak, but she nodded, a faint smile on her lips, then faded into the shadows. Ethan woke with a start, the room dark, the hum of his apartment's heater a pale echo of the hospital's drone. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sliver of peace, like Emily had seen his effort, like she was letting him go. He moved to Albany a month later, taking a desk job at a medical supply company. It wasn't what he dreamed of, not what his mum had wanted for him, but it was safe. The whispers stopped, the shadows faded, but he kept the list of rules, folded in a drawer, a reminder of what he'd survived. The journalist's article came out a few weeks later. A small piece in a local paper about alleged misconduct at St. Augustine's in the 70s. It didn't name Ethan, but it sparked an investigation, enough to make the hospital squirm. He hoped it was enough for Emily, but some nights, when the apartment was too quiet, he felt her chill in the air, a faint whisper of his name. He'd check the corners, half expecting to see her tattered gown, but there was nothing. Maybe Dr. Harper was right, and it was all in his head. Or maybe Emily was still out there, watching, waiting for the day the hospital's secrets were fully exposed. Ethan wasn't sure which scared him more. He never went back to St. Augustine's, never set foot in Area C again. But he'd never forget the hallway, the rules, or the girl who'd begged him to tell her story. Some truths, he realized, don't set you free, they just haunt you forever. All right, everyone, that's the end of Ethan's story. But I want to hear from you. What would you have done in his place? Would you have stayed in Area C or run for the hills? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you liked this creepy tale, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more stories that'll keep you up at night. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next ones. Stay spooky.